We might kick off if that's all right. So if I can invite Grace from the European Commission just to give us a couple of words of welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Bolton, and I'm the head of press at the Commission representation here in Dublin. I'd like to thank you all for signing up for this workshop. We're delighted to have you here. The main goals of the workshop will be to help you learn more about the European prize category in the SMEDIA Awards, the Student Media Awards, to give you some insights into the type of EU story you might be interested in writing, and to give you a very quick run through the institutions, which I'll be doing later on. So for now, I will hand over quickly to my colleague Rory Harte in European Movement Ireland, who will give you the introductory housekeeping pieces. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Grace, and everybody, thank you for coming. Just a quick note before we go on any further. We're going to be recording this, if that is all right with everyone. Obviously, if not, I'd ask you that you can head off, but this is just so other people who can't make it today might join on themselves. So my name is Rory Harte, and I'm the head of strategy here for European Movement Ireland, and I will be moderating the session today. But I think just to kick off, we might start and have a word of welcome from Barbara Nolan, who is the head of the European Commission Representation Office here in Dublin. So I will ask you to tune in.
Yes, hello everybody. Barbara Nolan here from the European Commission. I'd like to welcome you all, and I'm delighted to see so many of you participating in this workshop for student journalists interested in writing about the EU. There is an old saying, I think it's a Chinese one, may you live in interesting times. And I think for better or for worse, we are today living in very interesting times. It's an interesting time to be a student, particularly a student journalist. We are witnessing long-term shifts linked to climate change, digital technologies, demographics. We have a war, sadly, in Europe once again with Russia's unjustified invasion of Ukraine. We also see Russia weaponizing energy supplies to provoke a crisis, a wider crisis in Europe. And I think all of this is redefining and reshaping Europe today. Freedom of expression and freedom of the media are key features of our European way of life. They should never be taken for granted, and we only have to look outside of the European Union and at other parts of the world to see what happens when such freedoms don't exist. So, as I said, please don't take these for granted. We need to be constantly vigilant. As students, I encourage you to be curious, ask questions, and hold authorities to account, including the European institutions. Taking this one step further, in student journalism, you have a great opportunity to communicate ideas to your peers and have your voice heard. By running this workshop with European Movement Ireland and sponsoring the EU prize in the Student Media Awards, the European Commission is saying that your reports, your views matter, and we want to listen to you. I note from the competition categories that you have been invited to write articles on a wide range of topical EU issues. And I would encourage you, if you want to keep up with what's happening in the EU, I would encourage you to sign up for our weekly newsletter, which is usually very short and succinct, but gives you a great overview of what's happening in the EU week by week. And the link to this is in your participant pack, so you can link in with us. And you can also follow us on social media, follow the European Commission on social media. So these two sources, I think, will give you a great overview of EU activities and give you information and inspiration for your articles in the coming months and beyond. So I wish you all best of luck in the competition. And I hope this workshop opens up new horizons for you all. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rory.
Thanks a million, Barbara. And I think I'm going to have very wise words about holding the EU to account being a responsibility of journalists. Next on my list, I'm going to ask Stephen O'Shea to speak. Stephen is the Deputy CEO of European Movement Ireland here and has also had an illustrious career as a journalist before this. So, Stephen.
Thanks, Rory, and hi, everybody. Sorry, I just have a notification. Illustrious is a strong word, but thanks, Rory. I appreciate appreciate the sentiment. It's really great to be with you here today, and on behalf of European Movement Ireland, a very, very warm welcome. We're delighted to be working with the Commission to bring you this session again next year. A little bit about us. European Movement Ireland is an NGO based here in Dublin, working to develop and strengthen the relationships between Ireland and the European Union at all levels of society. And we try to do this by providing information, objective information, and facilitating debate on EU issues. And our work on the SMEDIAs is a core part of our work programme each year. The awards are ultimately about contributing to the future of good journalism and a healthy media, and both of which are vital for, as Barbara said, transparent, open and healthy societies. And their values very close to our heart here. And as Rory alluded to, the SMEDIAs are important to me personally also as a journalism graduate, and having worked as a journalist for a few years, I really remember how difficult it can be to get started, and getting experience and establishing a track record are important in what is a very competitive business. And I do think the SMEDIAs provide a space that contributes to that. As Barbara also said, at the EU level, there is an increasing recognition about the importance of media pluralism and independence and the threats to those. And those threats are definitely more real today than when I left DCU as a journalism graduate in 2008. Intimidation of journalists, an open challenge to independent media outlets, public channels, public media channels turned into propaganda channels, and of course, the great issue of disinformation. However, in the face of all this, I do think the media has shown remarkable adaptability and resilience. Business models have adapted, and although volatile, still they do seem more stable than in the recent past. And in the face of an assault of propaganda and disinformation, the brutal reality of the Russian invasion of Ukraine comes to light every day, due in large part to journalists and media outlets. And here in Ireland, every day, journalists continue to break stories and hold those in power to account. And that's, of course, as it should be. So I believe the future for you guys is positive. And we're here throughout this process to support you in any way we can. Particularly today, there's loads of resources and explainers on our websites, which might provide inspiration for your topic or guide you through it. And also you'll find information there about other issues too. You're just starting out in what will be a long and illustrious career, I hope. So you'll also find resources there on our EU jobs programs, our EU careers programs, etc., if that is of interest to you. But look, for now, I just want to welcome you again, wish you the very best of luck in the process, and hope today is useful in getting you started. Thanks a million. Back to you, Rory.
Thank you, Stephen. And finally, just in our introduction section here, I'd like to welcome Molly from Generation Y. And Generation Y, as you might know, run the SMEDIA Awards every year and have that fantastic contribution to student journalism. So Molly, take it away.
Thanks, Rory. Hi, everyone. My name is Molly O'Regan. I am the Events and Promotions Manager at Generation Y Student Marketing Network. So the National Student Media Awards is a prestigious programme honouring young and upcoming talent in the Irish media industry, encouraging creative media involvement and digital empowerment amongst the Irish youth. This will be our 23rd year running the awards, and the SMEDIA is one of the biggest student events of the year. And this year we have Virgin Media as a sponsor, which is great. And media is always growing, and these awards offer students a chance to showcase their best work and compete to win awards in TV, writing, radio, and podcasting, as there are around 40 categories. Obviously, we're here today to talk about the European Commission Award for journalism relating to European issues, but we also have other great awards like the RSA Award for journalism relating to road safety and the SFI Award for journalism relating to science and technology. We get about 1,000 entries every year. Industry leaders and experts judge the event, so it's an amazing chance for these students to get their work seen by people in the industry. The SMEDIAs attract media industry leaders and famous Irish personalities every year. Our previous judges and presenters have included Academy Award winner Lenny Abramson, Mark Hennessy, Irish Times news editor, and many other great editors as the judges. You can get all information on oxygen.ie and on our social media, which is the SMEDIAs on Instagram. Open dates for the awards will open on the 1st of March, closing on the 16th of March. And the SMEDIA award ceremony will take place on the 20th of April. Any queries, you can email me at manager@generation.y.ie, and we're really looking forward to working with you.
That's great. Thanks a million, Molly. Yeah, and as I say, they're fantastic awards. They're a fantastic resource and kind of opportunity for student journalists. And again, very handy to have that email address, manager at
Generation.y.ie. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Just to be able to connect in, or obviously ourselves, info@europeanmovement.ie. So now that we've gotten through the kind of early bits, just to explain who we all are, I am delighted to welcome our first speaker from this morning, or for this morning. Our first speaker is Mahon from Euronews. Mahon is a Europe correspondent in the Brussels Bureau, and she focuses on political development in the EU institutions, as well as reporting locally in the Benelux area. So I'm going to hand it over to yourself now, Maeve, if that is all right. Maeve, you're just on mute there.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. And it is an absolute pleasure to be with you all. As Rory said there, my name is Maeve, and I come from Ireland. I come from Mahon originally, and I studied in Trinity College in Dublin. And now I'm based in Brussels, where I work here at the heart of the European Union, just across the road from the Parlement, so the EU headquarters. And I work for Euronews, which is a multilingual international channel that you might know as the kind of hotel channel, or that channel that pops up in the airports all across the globe. We report in up to 10 languages and have massive communities as well online, especially in our Turkish and Arabic desks. So it is an amazing place to work because I have colleagues from all across the world and all across Europe. So it's great every morning when you come in, if there's a story happening in Spain or a story in Portugal or a story in Greece or Hungary, I can just sit down and chat to a colleague about it and get all the context, and it's incredible. And also it's multilingual newsroom, so we speak here every morning. It's like a little chatter of English or European English, which is an adapted version of English with lots of words that people have just adopted essentially and created into their own language here in Brussels, in the so-called Brussels bubble, if you like. But apart from that, here we speak Spanish and French and German and Portuguese. So every day you're in that environment as well, which is a really nice, enriching environment to work in. And before I worked at Euronews, I was here as a correspondent for France 24, which is a French channel. And before that, I was in Valencia for a couple of years working for a web TV. And yeah, before I also did an Erasmus in Germany. So I guess for me, once I was 16 already, it was clear journalism is where I want to go, because I remember doing work experience at the local newspaper the week weekender, and also with the solicitors. And it was clear, I was like, no, the solicitors too technical, too dry, too many documents. Journalism for me, it's a vibrant job. You're moving with the times. If you're curious, it's the job for you. And if you love writing, and I loved English history, politics, and I loved everything to do with photography, filming. So for me, it was very much clear. And then I set my sights on working as a journalist. And in fact, when I moved to Brussels about 10 years ago, in fact, I remember stalking Tony Connolly, the Irish broadcaster, so RTE's Europe editor, who's Tony, fantastic journalist who's still based here in Brussels, and reaching out to him to meet for coffee. And I ended up shadowing him at an EU summit. He was really kind to me, let me tag along. And through him, I made contacts with the BBC, and they brought me in for a couple of shifts. And that's how I gradually started my career, or started my path here in, in Brussels. So that's kind of how you get into journalism. Really, it's very much about knocking on doors, making phone calls, making contacts, being very available, being very interested, and being available to do absolutely anything. And yeah, that's really how I ended up here. So I guess today's task really is to tell you a little bit of what the day in the life of an EU reporter is like, and also to give you a couple of tips when you're entering the SMEDIAs. So I guess, and then obviously questions and answers, so you can then ask me anything you like. So regarding a day in the life of an EU reporter, well, obviously it's very different to that of a national reporter. Whereas as a national reporter, you probably have one beat and you might follow one story for a couple of weeks. Here, the world is your beat. Global affairs is your beat. Every single day, regardless of what's happening in the world, the European Union has a say, and you need to get on top of that as soon as possible. So every day can be absolutely different. You can do, for example, this morning, there's bilaterals going on this morning across the road in the EAS, which is the External Action Service. Joseph Borrell, the head of the EU Action Service Foreign Affairs Desk, he's over there meeting the head of Serbia and the head of Kosovo. They've been in talks for 3 or 4 hours. The local press has been downstairs trying to get a soundbite with either of them as they come out. So I'm keeping one eye on that. But that's just an example of just one of the stories perhaps you're doing. Later on, you could do another story. Every day is very different. And since I've been working here in Brussels, I have reported, for example, on many years ago, that long 24-hour Greek debt crisis summit back in July 2015, where heads of state and government were locked in behind closed doors all night. It looked like Greece would be kicked out of the Eurozone, but alas, in the early hours of the morning, they reached a deal. So I remember reporting on that. I also reported back in March 2016 on the Brussels bombings, a day I'll never forget, and the capture of the Brussels Red Bomber as well, Salah Abdeslam. I was one of the first reporters in one of the safe houses where he was. I also reported on that long stormy night here in Brussels on the 23rd of June 2016, when the UK decided to leave the European Union. I remember I went home and slept for 1 hour, and then the editor at that time, I was working for France 24, and they called me. They were like, Maeve, it's a no. And I leaped out of bed over to the European Parliament, and we were on air then all day interviewing MEPs, getting their reactions, finding out what would be at stake then for the European Union. And as we can see, many years later, it's a story that we're still very much following, with that chapter absolutely not closed at all. Then the European elections back in 2019, I reported on them a lot, doing a big road trip all across the continent with colleagues, talking to people from all walks of life, and especially from rural Europe, which obviously is super interesting to go rural, because it's a completely different picture to what you report when you're in the cities, when you're in the urban world. And also got to report on the night. We did a whole night of coverage. I was down in Lyon at the headquarters, where I was the presenter's friend. So I was kind of the geek who had to just explain and contextualize absolutely everything. And we brought the results. We were like on air for 7 hours. So that was kind of one of those nights where you're like, yeah, that was great. It's really brings all your reporting together, because imagine everything you reported on, suddenly on an evening like that, you have to contextualize so many different stories and bring in all your knowledge that you have built up from being based in Brussels. And finally, of course, I've been reporting a lot on the Russian invasion to Ukraine, which happened on the 24th of February, a day that I was meant to actually be on holidays and go off to Germany with my husband and my 2 small kids. I looked at him, I said, I'm not going anywhere. Like, it was 5 or 6 in the morning. I was like, you take the kids, I need to stay here. And I stayed then, and we reported like every minute of what was happening there. And of course, this is still a huge story. So a lot of our job as well is going to NATO headquarters, which is here in Brussels, speaking to the Americans, hearing their perspective. So yeah, very different, but a day in the life is a bit of everything. You have to do a lot of planning, a lot of researching, a lot of pitching. I'm a TV journalist, so we have to tell our stories visually, and that takes a lot of time. It takes production. So you need to get your guests, get your locations, organize your camera. Sometimes you're using your own camera. We were also trained with how to report from our mobile phones here in Euronews when I joined 4 years ago. So I can now go live with my mobile phone wherever I am, or I can film with my mobile phone and just send files into the newsroom in seconds, depending obviously on how good your internet connection is. A lot of liaising then with my editors as well, a lot of live broadcasting. Yeah, a little bit of everything. But one tip I think as an EU reporter is always to try and get ahead of the agenda if you can, because the EU, of course, is a pretty complex beast. And to understand it, you need to understand the bigger picture and the various interests that are at play. So I think when you come to Brussels to be a reporter, you don't need to know everything, because you'll learn that on the way, and you'll never know everything because there's too much to know. But you need to do a little bit of homework. You need to know just the basics, like who is the head of what institution does what, who's the current rotating EU president, what's on the agenda of the European Commission. To find that out, you can just watch, for example, or read the State of the Union speech, which is the annual address of the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, where she sets out her goals, her priorities for the year. It's good to know her team. It's good to know her spokespeople. It's good to know as well the agenda of the European Parliament, the Council as well, when heads of state and government are coming here to Brussels, what they will discuss, who are the press people in charge of which dossier. It sounds overwhelming. It is and it isn't, in the sense that everything that's happening, you can have access as well as a journalist to that information. And there's so much information in Brussels, and there's so many people who know a lot of things. There's really smart people in Brussels, the smartest people from all across the continent. They're all here in Brussels. And if you're a journalist, they're willing to speak to you. They're willing to have coffee with you. They're willing to talk to you on the phone. So never be afraid to pick up the phone and call them. Never be afraid to pick up the phone and call somebody. Forget about emailing. Emailing takes too much time. You don't have time as a journalist to email over and back and this and that. And shall we set up a meeting? No, you can call people and just informally, because at the end of the day, being a journalist, it's all about your phone book. It's all about your contacts. It's all about your access to information. As you can imagine, when we were covering the COVID pandemic, you know, if you have a friend or a colleague or someone, you know, who knows somebody who's a nurse or somebody who's a doctor, like all these are potentially people that you can speak to for your story. So the more people you know, the more people you have on your phone, the better reporting you'll be able to do. And as I said, you have access here to amazing information from the European Parliament, all the press people there. There's press people from all the EU member states. There's also press people from all the different political groups. They have knowledge on the different files that they're following. They have knowledge on their MEPs as well. They can tell you which MEP is good on this topic or who might know that other topic. Some MEPs as well are very close to their governments back home. They're very helpful MEPs to know, because they'll know more or less what governments are deciding on which area. So it's it's really helpful. Another piece of advice I would say is, if you want to report on the EU, come to Brussels. Brussels is not that boring bureaucratic place that just has EU flags. Brussels is a vibrant city. It's a fantastic place to be. It's a great place to go out, to meet people. It is a hub. And actually grown-ups here, like adults, they're always like, it's like an Erasmus for grown-ups here, because you see people who are like late 30s, late 40s, early 50s, late 50s, 60s, having a blast, just enjoying life, engaging with people from all walks of life, from different paths, different countries, different languages. It's just opens your mind, and it gives you such an enriching life experience. And Brussels, of course, is you're right at the heart of Europe geographically. So you're a quick train ride to Paris. It's just 1 hour 15 on the Thalys to Paris. You're just 2 hours from Amsterdam. You're not far from Germany as well. So you can get around. And that is amazing. It's so enriching to live in a place like that can offer you so much linguistic and cultural diversity and so much culture as well. So I would advise come to Brussels. First of all, get to know the people that you think would be helpful with your job. So that's all the press people and also different journalists. And EU summits take place here a couple of times a year. That is a great place to get to know the press from all across the continent. And the press is not your competitor, whereas back in Ireland, the press, the local press huddles, you might be all competing for the same story or the same interview or the big scoop. Whereas in Brussels, we're not competing. I'm not competing with colleagues from Poland. So if there's something happening in Poland, I can pick up a colleague from Poland, and she can contextualize or help me a little bit. Same as if she needs help on something, figuring out something that happened in Ireland or something in the UK, I can help her out. So that's also one thing that's really nice about working here in Brussels. Another thing, of course, when we in the media, we say Brussels, we don't mean the city, we mean obviously the Commission. So it's your job as well to just contextualize and explain everything. And if you don't understand it, your readers won't understand it or your viewers won't understand it. So if you're in doubt of something, just leave it out. Don't bother with it. If it sounds really weird, it is weird. So if it sounds like it's fake, it is fake. So just really that like cliche, just don't believe anything you read. Make sure you check everything, because as a journalist, you get like really targeted. Your mailbox is flooded every day with different press releases, pieces of information, different stakeholders trying to target you. So just really take a lot of things with a piece of salt and check everything. And also good to know if you work as a journalist in Brussels. I remember when I found out this, I was so excited. You get your badge. I can show you my badge. So once you're accredited as a reporter, you get your badge. This is your Access All Areas badge. This is your ticket to everything in this city, basically, and Strasbourg, of course, because the Parliament takes place there once a month. This is your entrance to the midday briefings of the European Commission. This is your entrance into all the different EU institutions. You can even go and have your lunch in their canteen, which is really good and subsidized, so you can get a cheaper lunch. But it's also, you have access with this badge to the European Parliament's audiovisual facilities. That means if you're over on a story, you can access their camera crew for a live broadcast. You can access their TV studios, their radio studios, and it's all for free. So that's a fantastic facility and really good to know, because a lot of people don't know that. So that's when you get your badge. To get that badge, you need to prove that you are working as a journalist, maybe as a freelancer. You need to show proof of payment, or else you need to have a letter from your editor. So many people come here completely broke with no journalism experience, and they just gradually, little by little, build up their contacts, build up their stories, start doing some freelancing. Then they get their badge, and then they're away in the hack. And I feel like this is the kind of place where there's a lot of word of mouth as well. Like I see it with the Spanish press corps here, like they all are like a big family and they all help each other. So when one journalist goes on holidays in August, another journalist fills in, and then suddenly that journalist then gradually kind of moves up the ranks, and they all end up getting lots of work. A good thing as well to know, when you have that badge, you can also get an email every day into your mailbox with information on the agendas for the council and also the audiovisual links. So whenever there's a summit or a ministerial taking place, you can access all that material. So that's great for audiovisual journalists. Sometimes as well, the really helpful press people from the council, they actually transcribe for you. Now, of course, you can use, there's amazing apps like Trint or Otter that you can use to transcribe your tape. That saves a lot of time. And if you have that already, it's much quicker to file your story, especially for digital. So that's a really good tip as well. And ahead of summits, it's normally Charles Michel, the EU Council President, who sends a letter to heads of state, and that kind of sets the tone for the meeting that is coming. And every day at noon, it is the rendezvous with the European Commission here. So just like in the White House, every day here, reporters in Brussels have access to a midday briefing, which is essentially the European Commission's chance to stand up on a podium and tell them what are the big stories of the day, what is the agenda of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen or the other 27 commissioners. Those commissioners, you need to know a couple of them. You don't really need to know or follow the agenda of the 27, but a couple of them you do need to keep an eye on and follow, because they're very important and very influential. And that midday briefing is a chance for you to ask your questions as well. And it's really helpful because you can find out about a big story in the Western Balkans or a big story in Italy or a big story in Greece, because you'll notice national journalists will be asking questions about that story. So it's a good way just to keep afloat of all the European stories. You won't be guaranteed to get a great answer, just heads up, because obviously the European Commission is very limited in what it can say. It has to be very careful what it says. It can't upset member states too much. So they will not comment on any domestic stories in a massive way. And they're a little bit limited on what they have to say. But at the end of the day, what's really helpful, if you go to the midday briefing and you hang around afterwards, then you can go up, meet all the press spokespeople, and then have a little bit more of an off the record with them. And that's when you can get really interesting nuggets of information and background. The Commission and the Council as well, they also provide a lot of background technical briefings on every topic. So every time they have a proposal or they've something to announce, they will also have a technical briefing where you can ask every question, regardless of how stupid it is. And then you can really dig into the technical details. Because obviously the more you know, the better you will be able to report your story. Obviously, you can't follow every briefing because you have to actually produce as well. So it's tricky and it's time consuming, but you just have to try and do what you can. One thing to watch out for as well is EU jargon. You're going to find it everywhere on EU press releases and EU presentations. Never be tempted to copy and paste it because normally you can't understand it. I mean, if you don't use that kind of language when you're chatting among people, like your viewers or your readers won't be able to understand that either. So it's really important to just keep an eye on that and try and break things down for your viewers and your readers to make the institutions interesting, because they're really fascinating and there's so much going on and there's so many stories that you can tell as well. But often they're hidden behind weird, strangely written press releases. So I guess that's in a nugget, really a glimpse of the day in the life of an EU reporter and a bit about what it's like to report here. So I had a look at the topics that, when it comes to the SMEDIAs, I had a look at there's a couple of topics there that you've been invited to send an article around. And I feel like when it comes to writing an article on any of those topics, whether it's the EU response to the Russian invasion or the response to the energy crisis, the pandemic, the Green Deal, democracy, digital age, the CAP, Europe's role in the world, and European year skills, like that's every single topic in the whole wide world, basically right there. So you can be as creative as you want, be as original as you want, really passionate. I think the more passion you have in your story and your gathering, that passion will come across in your piece. And link real life to these stories, link real life to the European Union or to the European Union on the world stage. Open your eyes to people around you. I mean, if it's, for example, there's a girl or there's a bakery and they've received a massive bill, you could focus on that and start with the kind of human side, get some nice photos of the baker, and then link it to Brussels. What is Brussels trying to do to help people like that local baker, the baker where you get your bread every Saturday? You know, try and go for the human side to make it a little bit more interesting. Around the Russian invasion, I mean, in Ireland, we've so many Ukrainian refugees. You could tell their story and how their life has changed and how they're getting on in Ireland. And you know, then there's the democracy, there's the whole or the digital age story, there's the whole Elon Musk stuff. The Twitter is headquartered in Dublin. Lots of people getting fired. Like, what kind of clash is coming there between Elon Musk, the new head of Twitter, and the European Commission, Thierry Breton? So I think, like, with all those stories, you can really look at everything with climate change. I mean, I don't even need to mention how many stories you could write about that, and then just link it to Brussels, and don't be intimidated. As I said, don't be afraid to call anyone in Brussels. They're here to help you. They're here to make your job that little bit easier. And like, reporting from Brussels is not dry. It's not boring. It's really, really fascinating. You are learning every single day. You're constantly learning. It's a real like window to the whole wide world. You're not just in a local town just covering the local news. You're Europe on the world stage. So here as well, it's like a crossroads in Brussels. We have people coming and going constantly. There's lots of events taking place, conferences where you have access to incredible speakers, amazing people working, whether it's in human rights or climate action, and they're all passing through Brussels. So you as well, as a journalist, you're able to catch these people. So that's why I said earlier, planning is really key to try and get ahead of all these things that are coming so that you know when such will be in town and you can already set up an interview or pitch that interview to your editor. Because obviously everything you do, you need to get the green light from your editor. So I mean, I'm very passionate, so I could talk for hours about being a journalist in Brussels, but I think, Rory, I can stop there. If anyone, we've still got 7 minutes, if anyone has some questions, or if you want to ask me any questions.
Yeah, well, what I will say, thanks a million for that, Maeve. I think that's such a huge kind of body of really, really helpful work or information. What I might do is I might throw it open to the floor. So if anyone has any questions, what you can do is just pop it into the chat box there, or just jump in. But I might kick off quickly. I think kind of that advice about kind of linking real life to the EU, I think that's incredible advice for how easy it is to explain the EU once you do it in the prism of our day to day. Can you give us a kind of a practical example that kind of you've used recently, just to kind of show how you might do that?
Sure. Well, I guess when it comes to the bakery story, I said that because I actually visited a baker recently here in rural Belgium, in Wallonia, and I had seen it in the local Belgian press that he'd received an energy bill for 50,000 euros. So I just said, that's an interesting story, pitched it, and I went down, I booked a cameraman, and we traveled down into the beautiful Belgian green countryside to a tiny village and found this gorgeous bakery, which was a real hub. And he was actually expanding the baker. So he was really like, it's going so well, because obviously the bakery didn't close during the pandemic. So his business was thriving. And but he showed me his bill. He's like, I just received this bill, 50,000 euros. I cannot pay it, and I will not pay it. And he said, at the same time, I want to expand, I want to build on, and our business is thriving. But he said, I just can't, we'll be gone, we'll be dead. So we can't continue with this. This is going to choke us. So that was my way into what the European Union was trying to do in order to support people like him, because he was the lucky one that he didn't close, and he told me he wouldn't be closing. But whereas in Germany, in neighboring Germany, there's been so many bakers that have had to shut down, because obviously they rely so much on energy and electricity to heat the products. And like, he was saying, I'm not closing. And that's how I led in then to the kind of more clunky policy stuff, because I must say the energy stuff is very dry. It's really dry, like reforming the electricity market, like things like that are very dry. If you start a story with top line on that, you won't have anyone with you along the way. It'll be really, really hard to make it interesting. So again, I'm a visual journalist. I'm a television journalist. So for me, it's all about the images. So starting the story with beautiful pictures of gorgeous little pastries and buns and birthday cakes is a way of kind of bringing our viewer in and bringing them then to the story, and making them think as well about, oh, like in different countries, what's being done to help people in Germany, what's being done to help people in Greece, what's being done to help people in Sweden. That's one thing we can do a lot here as well, is do kind of a tour de table, like a little bit of a glimpse, a picture of what's happening all across the continent in that story. So that's just one example. Yeah.
That's really great. And as I say, if anyone wants to jump in with a question, as I pop it in the chat, or just chime in, that would be great. But in the absence of that, I'm going to jump in with one more of my own, if that's all right. There's some really good stuff there about who you might jump in to talk to, and kind of places you might go to get the information to kind of build out your story and really kind of meet those sources. Obviously, a lot of our participants here are based in Ireland and aren't going to be over to Brussels in the next little while, just because a lot of them are students. So what tips would you have for kind of accessing that information remotely as much as possible, and kind of what areas can you recommend they might look to in terms of, kind of press feeds or things like that coming from the different institutions?
Well, to do your work, you don't need to leave your room. You can be literally in your room and have access to absolutely everything. We've seen that during the pandemic. I mean, for us, it was trickier because we were TV, so we physically came to work. But all journalists based in Brussels who were writing for newspapers, they were just filing from their rooms. They didn't leave. They didn't have to leave. And that is because you have access to everything. Once you get your badge, or even before you get your badge, in fact, you can access a lot of those websites because they're open to the public as well. They're free websites like europa.eu or EBS, which is Europe by Satellite. Every day on Europe by Satellite, we have feeds, so access to all the clips and press conferences and visits. For example, if Ursula von der Leyen has Giorgia Meloni, for example, the new Italian Prime Minister here, we can follow that all online. You can't obviously ask your question, but you can follow it. Or if you want to dig deep into the European Union's past, you can access archives as well on the European Parliament website. There's a multimedia area there where you can get, I think it's really simple to get a password and just get everything you need there. Also, what I find really helpful is the European Parliament offices, and in Dublin, there's the European Parliament office and of course the European Commission office. They're more than willing to answer any questions that you may have, and also to give you the phone numbers and the email addresses of the press people. It sounds like a bit of a maze. It is and it isn't, in the sense that this all sounds a little bit overwhelming, but once you kind of get into the flow of this, it becomes second nature. It's just really at the start trying to find, it's almost like a puzzle, trying to find who's the right person to talk to, but you'll get there. And you don't need to come to Brussels for that. You can be literally at home. All you need to do is be creative and think of a brilliant idea for your story. And as a journalist, by the way, you need brilliant ideas every single day. That is being a journalist. Every day you need brilliant ideas. So sometimes when someone says, oh, where do you want to go for dinner? What would you like to eat? I was like, I don't know. Like, I've been coming up with brilliant ideas all week for work that, like, when it comes to dinner, I can't think anymore. Like my creativity is gone. But that is a tip going forward. Like, the more great ideas you have in a newsroom, the more you can pitch, the more enthusiasm you can bring, the more passion you can bring, the more opportunities that will arise, and the better writing that the better stories that you will end up doing.
Maeve, I might ask a question if that's allowed, Rory.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm really mindful that our students that are listening are starting out at the very beginning of the process you've come through. So if you could talk to yourself, X number of years ago as an undergrad, about to write your first article for a student newspaper, what, like, 1 or 2 sentences of inspiration would you give? You're looking at a blank page with this list of topics. Which one will I write about? What will what angle will I take? I mean, what kind of questions do you think they should be asking themselves?
That's a very good question. And I was in your shoes a couple of years ago. And I was in Trinity, and the first thing I did actually in Trinity was volunteer for Trinity FM, and also write for The Record, which I loved. So I was writing stories, and I was writing stories about stuff that impacted me and impacted students and impacted people that I knew. So when you're attacking this, think about what impacts you, what impacts the people around you, what impacts the people that you meet on your daily commute, what impacts the person where you buy your local groceries from, that little corner salon where you get your nails painted. Where's that girl maybe from? Maybe she has family in a country that has an interesting story to tell. Just keep your eyes open, look around you, see look at your daily life, what's impacting your daily life, and then see how you can link it to Brussels, because there's so many things in there, whether it's even like getting on your bike across Dublin City. Like, can you get on your bike? Is that a pleasant experience? Is there anything that the European Union is doing to try and promote that you can use your bike in a better way? Pollution, things like that. Like, can you breathe well? I mean, you could probably breathe better in Dublin because you've got the lovely sea right next door to Brussels. I mean, here it's car city, like, we're choked with cars. Like, think of those things on a daily basis. Also, how much now does it cost for you to drink, have a glass of wine in the evening, or go for a beer, or have your lunch? Can you still afford these things? All these things that you're doing in your daily life. Also traveling, your access to travel, Erasmus, things like this. Like, these are all kind of European stories. Like, I think everything can essentially be a European story. Everything can be linked to these stories, I think. Yeah.
I'm gonna quickly jump in. Sorry, Grace.
No, I just wanted to thank you for that, because I think you really explained very clearly to our participants how to find those linkages and how to look for those linkages. because I think, you know, when you look at the list of topics, they seem so far away, but I think
Yeah.
Maeve has just given us some really good advice on how to make them closer to home. So thanks so much for that, Maeve.
No
Yeah,
worries,
it
pleasure.
was- I was going to say the exact same thing. Thanks for that, Grace. Maeve, we've got two quick questions here from the participants, and maybe just because we're running to the end of the time, we might keep it quick. So one is from Pat, who is based in Brussels right now, and says your tips are very useful. Pat asks, how did the Valencia job come about?
Hi, Pat. Valencia came about actually thanks to a European program, which is now Erasmus Plus. Back then it was Leonardo da Vinci. I had literally just graduated. I was desperate to work in journalism. I was trying everything, but nothing was working because I had obviously no experience apart from the quick Trinity FM and the record. And a friend of mine said, Maeve, I'm going to Italy in 2 weeks on this program. It's called the Leonardo da Vinci. I'm going to be given some training and then I'll do an internship. You should apply. And I was like, I don't speak Italian. And she's like, okay, we'll try Spain. I was like, I don't speak Spanish. She's like, it doesn't matter. I applied and I got it. And I ended up learning Spanish there on this program. And then I was thrown into an internship at a TV production, a production studio where I obviously couldn't speak much Spanish. So I was just carrying cables a lot of the time. But through that, then I ended up getting a job at a web TV, which was brilliant. It was like the dream job because literally I was the only person in Valencia who was a native English speaker and had a little bit of experience doing TV production. So that's how I ended up in Valencia. And I spent 3 years there. And then I made my way over to Brussels and I still haven't gone back to Ireland. So that's that. There you go.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sure that Brussels is where I ended up meeting you way back.
I know,
way
yeah,
back.
yeah.
And the last question just that we've got there is from Eve. And I guess you've answered this a little bit through Grace's question there. So for someone who's not particularly savvy with politics or current affairs issues, can you think of some relevant features or opinion or societal issues that might work? But as I say, I suppose you've kind of covered that somewhat with Grace's question.
I guess just open your horizons. Like, I mean, when you're reading about, I guess every day you probably read maybe the Irish press, just open up maybe your mind and open up your internet pages to different websites, perhaps like Politico as well, Euronews, obviously. EU Observer is a really good site where you can find out more about European stories, read more. Euractiv as well is a good site all about European stories, and also the local. There's the local in all different member states, which is great. Like if you want to follow what's happening in Italy and you don't speak the language, you can follow that and just keep a little bit of a broad kind of grasp of what's going on in different countries.
That's great. That's really solid advice. Just kind of broad perspectives. Maeve, we're coming towards the end of your section now. So is there any kind of quick final words, kind of 1 or 2 sentences that you want to say to everybody?
Well, just best of luck and well done choosing journalism as a career. It is the most amazing job in the whole world. It is different every day. You have access to everyone. You have a front row seat at everything that's happening, and you have the privilege of telling these stories to people. So I really think it's an amazing job. It's a job I think I'll be doing till I'm like, I'll never be retiring. I'll still be like Pat Kenny, he's 70 and he's still doing his daily radio show. It's just amazing. And you are all so lucky because you're so young. So you are so digital savvy. So you are going to have amazing careers as journalists because you'll be able to tell your story in so many different ways using your phones, using technology. So just enjoy. Yeah. And just be passionate and be curious and tell stories and just, yeah, tell injustices and just like, yeah, do your thing and best of luck with the SMEDIAs. I'm sure you'll do really well. I'll keep an eye.
Thanks a million, and really great to have you, Maeve. Thanks a million again.
Take care. Best of luck. Stay in touch.
Bye.
Bye.
Yep. Bye. Okay. So what we might do now, we've got our second speaker of the morning. Our second speaker is, and I'm delighted we have her, is Mahnoor Choudry, who is a final year law student in UCD, but she's also the last year's winner of the European Commission SMEDIA Award. So I will just bring her up on the screen here. Mahnoor, if you want to kick off.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Rory.
Hi everyone. So as Rory said, my name is Manny, and I'm currently a final year law student in UCD. Last year, I was the editor of the College Tribune. You guys might have heard of it. It's UCD's independent student newspaper. And I also won the award for journalism relating to European affairs last year. So a little bit about the article that I wrote is, to begin with, is that it was a features article, and I explored the experience of going on an Erasmus exchange program in it. But I suppose another aspect that I explored was going on such a program that was, ran by the EU during a global pandemic. So I spoke about how young people had fared under the pandemic and how challenging going away to another country generally is anyway, but to do that in a global pandemic, it kind of had its own challenges. I also spoke about the Erasmus program in general and all that it has to offer. But I put that, of course, into the context of being somebody in my early 20s and going away abroad. So I think everything that Maeve said, I could really kind of back up. And I think that's something I can see in my article as well. A lot of the time when we think of the European Union and, European Union affairs, we kind of tend to think about political issues. We don't really tend to think about how our lives have really benefited, especially as students, because of being a member of the European Union. And it's something I for sure didn't realize either until, I got the chance to go away somewhere in Europe and experience living abroad, and just kind of even how seamless the transition to living in another country was because of the fact that we're members of the EU. I went away to Stockholm, Sweden. So, despite the currency differences or the language differences, it was very seamless to kind of move away. There were a lot of supports available, and it was through the European Commission, and it was through the university being very well versed in European Union sort of like laws and policies, I suppose, in terms of helping students to move away to another country. And sort of like, I thought I might talk about 3 different tips I could give you guys when you're writing your article. So the first one is to choose a topic that interests you. The second is to show engagement with the EU. And the third is to just structure your article well and write well. So going on to the first one about a topic that interests you, that's sort of something I said that, generally we think the European Union is so like far-fetched, it's so above us, but really it plays into a lot of different parts of our lives. I knew that I had gone away on Erasmus. It was generally one of the best times of my life. And to have gone away during a pandemic as well, it was so special to have been able to do that, especially when Ireland was going through such a tough time in terms of restrictions. And Sweden had a completely different policy with the way it handled the pandemic. And that's certainly something that was very close to me. And I sort of, second of all, showed engagement with the European Commission because during my article, I spoke about what the Erasmus program is, how it's sort of operated in the last couple of years and how differently it's operating now. If there were any current sort of supports that the European Commission had brought in to address the sort of current struggle of being in a pandemic. I also showed engagement by sort of really recognizing that, if we weren't members of the EU, those experiences wouldn't really be possible. The seamless transition to moving away somewhere in college, we wouldn't really have those opportunities if we weren't members of the EU. Especially, if you're going away to somewhere like the States or Australia or Canada, we don't really get the same supports because it's international study abroad. Whereas when you're kind of going away on Erasmus, the European Commission can offer you grants and supports and sort of like just general advice as well at moving away. So I think that's how I was able to show engagement with the EU. I kind of looked at how me as a young person in my 20s and what the EU could offer me. And like lastly, another thing that Maeve said, I suppose would help with your structure is that like visuals are really important. So you can really kind of spruce up your article. You can talk about something really interesting, but you can also add in imagery, you can add in graphs. If it's something political, you can add in kind of your own work or something to show engagement with it. In my article, I started off with a very personal touch. I spoke about how it felt to be moving away, how it felt to be so young, and you know, taking kind of leap of faith in the pandemic and the fears that you might have. And they're kind of general fears that I think everyone had in second year of college or third year of college, and of like moving away for the first time, particularly after living at home for your whole college experience. So things like that, I think, can really bring a bit of your own voice and your own personality into your writing. And then in terms of structuring, it's sort of, it's like a general tip of journalism, really. It's like, you know, if you have something to say, you tell people what you want to say, you say it again, and then you repeat yourself, but you tell it in a more interesting way, as in you bring anecdotes into it, you kind of make it relatable for your reader. You don't just talk about yourself either. It's kind of, I suppose, like a skill of like bringing in your own memories, but also telling a story objectively. And you can use visual guides, like pictures that you might have taken in an experience that you kind of went through with the EU. And I suppose those are my three main tips. And in terms of research for the article, I suppose my article was very personal. It's something that when I won the award at the SMEDIAs ceremony, something the presenter kind of said as well. They said that's one thing that had stuck out to them when choosing the article. It's because my article just really showed such an engagement, and it was such a personal note about my experience of being a young person in my 20s. So that's another great tip. Just like let your own experience shine through. And then in terms of researching for the article, I really just looked up the Erasmus Plus program on Google. I kind of researched the European Commission website, the Europa website. I looked at different supports available. I looked at different students' experiences, and that sort of, you know, there's a wealth of knowledge available on Google if you just look up like anything you're interested in relative to the EU, and it sort of helps to read other people's experiences as well. Kind of helps you tell your story in a much more coherent way and relatable way. So, but yeah, that's all I have to say really at the minute, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
That's great, Manny. That's really fantastic. And I think kind of that personal kind of experience and kind of showing tips that way is really, really helpful. No, that's not what I meant to do. That's what I meant to do. Yeah, as Manny said, if anyone has any questions, we've got about 5 minutes for questions, if that's all right. I might jump in with, actually, no, Eamon, you've got your hand up. Do you want to jump in there quickly? Yeah, Eamon, can you hear me? Do you want to go? I don't know if we can hear you. Okay, well, maybe just while they're kind of getting ready there, I might just jump in. They asked a separate question, and I think it's maybe a great one for you to answer. So I know you mentioned that you're a law student, and he was mentioned, do we have to be studying journalism, or could there be any third level student participating? And I think I wonder, kind of being a law student, and obviously you mentioned that you were working in the paper there and editing the paper. What really attracted you to the competition, and kind of what was that leap for you?
Yeah, so well, SMEDIAs is kind of Ireland's main student journalism awards. So it's definitely something I wanted to apply to. And, you know, especially after a whole year of working in journalism, really like running the paper and coming up with stories, particularly in terms of like investigative journalism, there was so much out there that we could have put in and I could have applied for with different articles. But I suppose I went and applied to the SMEDIAs because I felt like the Erasmus article was like a really special one. And like I think my whole article, like even winning it, I couldn't believe it. Like, you know, I remember one of my friends saying before the ceremony that they were like, people are going to be writing about such serious things, you know, like I think you did really good by getting nominated for it, but I don't think you'll win it. People are going to be talking about really serious political things, and like this friend of mine is like so blunt, so cutthroat, and I was like, yeah, to be fair, you're right. Like nobody wants to read an article about some, like, you know, somebody like who's 21, 22 going away and having like the best time of their lives for 6 months. But I suppose it is what the judges loved. I think they just loved that actual experience, you know, like that the European Union and like everything it offers is not so far away from our student experience, and it really has enriched my life. So I think even having that award as a category in the competition is great, because it allows you to it challenges you to look beyond just what you think of journalism is, like, which is like telling news stories and investigative journalism. It as I said, you can find a story in anything. It doesn't have to be a major thing happening. It can be literally your own experience of being a student. That could be a story itself. And it's something that people are probably going to want to read, in years to come, like 10 years time, somebody's probably going to come across that article and be like, oh, wow, this is what it felt like, after a massive pandemic and how it changed everyone's lives. But this one student went and, she went to like experience something completely different. And it was great.
That's really good. And I think that link to what Maeve was saying there about being able to link to kind of real life stories. And obviously you did that really well yourself. Manny, I'm interested to know kind of what doors has winning the SMEDIA European Commission Prize opened for you, and kind of what recognition has that gotten for you?
One really kind of cool thing I was invited to back in June was a lunch with the European Journalists Association. I think every year the winner of the award is invited to the lunch in the RDS, and a lot of journalists who are members of the association in the EU attend it, as well as they always get a keynote speaker as well. And this year's one was the British ambassador to Ireland. So I think when you're so young, when you're a student and just starting out in journalism, to be kind of surrounded by people who are so accomplished and have done so much with their lives, it's so inspiring. And to be able to chat to the British ambassador as well was super interesting. You don't really get those opportunities just writing for your college paper, or like not putting yourself out there, not applying for awards like these. You never know what opportunities it can bring. But more than that, I think I've really valued making connections with the judges who read my article and invited me to the lunch and kind of spoke to me at the lunch as well. It was really nice. Everyone's super nice. They want to help. I think it was really cool that I was the youngest person there as well. You can really tell that they value young people entering journalism, and they want to give them as many supports as possible. And I study law, so like the initial plan is to be a lawyer, but like definitely I have such a passion for journalism, and being surrounded by that support and that network makes journalism seem like a very viable and feasible career as well, like not as out of reach as I thought it could have been.
Perfect. So the last thing there, just the question from Ema there would be, hi Manny, would you be able to provide your email address if I need any advice that I can ask you? So maybe what I would say is email, if you want to email myself, and I can pass on your email address to Manny. So just at info@europeanmovement.ie. I think our time on this section is finishing up quickly. Do you want to have any kind of quick final words of wisdom for everyone here?
No, not at all. Just enjoy what you're writing, and I suppose just kind of let your own voice shine through. Like there isn't one structure that you have to follow, I think, in journalism. Like the best pieces are the ones that are the most interesting to read, and the ones that are most interesting to read are the ones that are most honest to the author's opinion.
That's great. That's actually really solid advice. Thanks a million. Manny, thanks a million for taking time out of your day to come and kind of share your experience with everyone. It's really brilliant. So we'll leave you go. What I will say is maybe we'll all take 5 minutes break before we come in for the last section. So the last section, we will have a quick we will have a session with Grace Bolton, who we spoke to at the start, who's the head of press and media at the European Commission Representation Office here in Ireland. It should be really good for kind of practical advice on where you can go, what topics you can look at, and she'll also be able to talk us through the European Union, its institutions, its processes, and the real kind of meat and potatoes of kind of the EU itself. So it's about 5 past by my clock here, so maybe 10 past we'll kick off again, if that's okay. So just time to get some water or the very quickest cup of tea. Thanks everyone.
I might just come in and say, I really want my session to be kind of a workshop. So in some ways I'll blast through different institutions, and it's a chance for you to ask me questions. So if there's anything you want to clear up or any kind of little thing you're not sure of how it works, it's an open opportunity to do that. And then I'll close with some tips from my side as to how to prepare your stories. So see you in a few minutes.
Thanks, Grace. Okay, so see you all at 10 past. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Hopefully, most of you are back. And I'd say if not, then people will start kind of pulling in quite shortly. So Grace, I wonder, are you ready to kick off with your session, or do you want a minute or two to wait? Yep, well, Grace is clearly still on her break, so we might just leave it a minute or two more. Just in advance of Grace's section, I'd say that going through, if there's any questions, just please do kind of shoot them into the chat, and we will be able to pick them up at any point. And after Grace's section, we can have a quick kind of review of everything, and anyone can ask anything from there as well. But once she comes back, I think we'll be ready to kick off. I suppose while we're waiting for Grace, it might be handy just to, one thing that kind of I think is handy just to look at quickly. You would have all received a participant pack this morning and over the last couple of days. And I think just kind of touching on some of the stuff that everyone has talked about earlier, there's some really good tips on places you might look for information at the end. So what we might do quickly for 5 minutes at the end is just chat through them. But before that, Grace, your section, we'll leave you kick off, okay?
Hi everyone. So I'm gonna ask Rory when to switch slide. Isn't that the way we're gonna do it?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll just wait for the presentation to come up.
Perfect. Just one session.
Yeah, no problem. So like I said, I'm going to be going through some information that may seem totally obvious. Just going through it just to give everyone the chance. There's no such thing as a stupid question. you know, everyone here is at the beginning of their journey, and even much further on in their journey, it's always good to remind yourself who's who, who's what, which institutions which. You know, there's some institutional basic issues that it's always helpful to go back over. Here we go. So, as I mentioned earlier, I work for the European Commission representation in Ireland. My head of office, Barbara Nolan, spoke to you. So we basically work in what you could describe as the EU, the European Commission's embassy in Dublin. We are not a member state, we're an international organisation, so we don't have an embassy, we don't have an ambassador. So we have a representation and we have a head of representation office. So we work here in this lovely picture, an office on Lower Mount Street. We have an information centre. In previous years, we would have had this workshop in our building, but we've just found it's easier for people to follow it online because you don't have the expense of accommodation and travel to Dublin. But if you're in Dublin, feel free to pop in. We've got informational brochures in the lobby and you can take any home. So move to the next slide. So I just wanted to start off with clarifying exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about the European Union, 27 member states. Previously, it was 28 before the UK left. The UK is still coloured in yellow because they joined in 1973 at the same time as Ireland and Denmark. It's just worth remembering we all joined at the same time. Then there have been successive waves of enlargement, 1981, 1986, it's all colour coded, you can see it before you. And the most recent enlargement was Croatia in 2013. Next slide, please. So the EU institutions at a glance. So I would like to point out that there are 3 decision-making institutions in the top right: the European Commission, the Council of the EU, and the European Parliament. Guidance is given by the European Council in the top right, which is sort of the top level body of all the prime ministers, heads of state and government. Then independent of all of this, you've got the European Court of Justice. And then the institutions receive advice from 2 independent institutions, the Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions. In parallel, there are different bodies like the Ombudsman, the Court of Auditors, the Central Bank, the Investment Bank, and lots of different agencies. I won't go into all their names. Next slide, please. So whenever I mention these EU bodies, how do they work together? So the top level agenda is set by the European Council. So as I said, the heads of state or government from each EU country. That means presidents, prime ministers, in our case, the Taoiseach attends. They say, we see the following issues as major priorities to deal with. You might say the war in Ukraine, the situation with gas prices, the situation with energy supply. All of this is a #1 priority for the European Commission to be dealing with. So the Commission will take this and say, okay, well, we want to regulate the cost of utilities, the cost of gas, cost of electricity. What measures can we introduce at a union level to do that? So the Commission, which consists of commissioners, 1 from each member country, would propose legislation and budget. So they would propose measures to address this. And they'll also have an EU budget to back these things up. So then these proposals go to the European Parliament, where the MEPs are directly elected by the citizens, and then also over to the EU Council, where there are diplomats and ministers from each EU country. So you can see that there are different ideas at play. So the member states will feed into the council, and let's say the civil servants and the ministers are saying, this proposal doesn't work for us, this proposal could be improved by doing this. The Parliament will say, well, I've spoken with my citizen constituents, and the idea of yes, greenhouse gases are a problem, but for my constituents in rural Ireland, reducing the number of cows in the European Union is not going to work. So you're going to have these kind of different interest groups being represented in that way. So they form a decision-making triangle. So you might remember from the previous slide, there was a triangle of the European Commission, the Council of the EU, and the European Parliament. So they interact with each other in what's called a trilogue to discuss concrete policies and to find compromises. And really, a lot of what EU policymaking is about finding compromises to tricky issues. And one of the angles to make a story out of is to find out who wants what and who gets what. So, let's say this idea of reducing greenhouse gases, there's a proposal to reduce the number of cows all across the EU. Well, who does that suit? Maybe it suits the countries that are more producing wheat and have a different setup in their agriculture. Maybe it doesn't suit a country like Ireland. So how does Ireland defend its interests? How do Irish MEPs defend Irish farmers? And then who wins in the end? What compromise is struck? So that's one place in which there is an opportunity for creative tension and for ideas. Another is citizens' feedback and lobbying. So in the right-hand side, you can see there's a lot of opportunity for input. So before the Commission adopts any policy, there is a regulatory scrutiny period where any proposal is the idea behind the proposal is published and citizens are allowed to give their comments on it. There's also a mechanism of a citizens consultation, so citizens initiative. So citizens can decide that they would like a policy on a certain idea, like, I don't know, free transport for all. And if you get a certain number of signatures, you can present that to the Commission as a policy that the citizens would like the Commission to explore. So there are actually lots of, even whenever the legislation or proposal or communication is being prepared, there's a lot of consultation with stakeholders. So these institutions don't operate in a vacuum. They very much do engage with both citizens, stakeholders, interest groups, member states at different stages in the process. So it's all built in. And those stages in the process are moments where if you're following a very complicated policy, you can actually get some information about who wants what and who's going to get what. Next slide, please. So just to illustrate it a bit, I mentioned that at the very top is the European Council. The members, the heads of state and government attend what we call summits. So it's another way of remembering that this is at the top of the decision-making pyramid, the summits, the EU summits. So whenever you see Tony Connolly reporting about the Taoiseach being in Brussels, he will have been in Brussels to attend the European Council. They happen normally 4 times a year, but if there's something really exceptional happening, they'll have 1 or 2 extra meetings in the year. And during COVID, they actually met online, which was completely revolutionary, but they're back to in-person meetings. So these pictures are just a little older. You can see some people who are no longer there, but you can see this is an opportunity for these heads of state and governments to really interact with each other, to have conversations in person about things that are on the agenda and off the agenda. And actually it serves a very important function. The UK is noticing now that they're not there anymore, that they're missing that informal space to discuss things with their European counterparts. And it's something that's really been quite useful for us in Ireland, because anytime, even if something's not on the agenda, there's an issue, there's a problem, it's a chance for the Prime Minister, for the Taoiseach, to discuss it with his counterparts. And these meetings happen in this very colourful room in the bottom right. It's just off Rue de la Loi, opposite the Commission building. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier decision-making triangle. All of these institutions have nice logos, so I thought I'd introduce it one more time. The Commission proposes legislation, and the Commission logo is based on the design of the Berlaymont building. You can see it as well behind me. The Berlaymont is a 4-sided building, which is a very distinctive one if you ever get the chance to visit it. The Berlaymont is the headquarters of the European Commission. We have the commissioners are all in that building, the spokesperson service, the midday press briefing. It's at the sort of heart of the European agenda, and it's the symbol of the Commission, which is why that's the Commission logo. So the Commission proposes legislation. The Council of the EU scrutinises the legislation and feeds into it. So you've got the Council of the European Union there. It's a kind of it's the shape almost of a barrel, but that's the shape of the building where those council summits are held. And then you've got the European Parliament, so that's like the shape of a hemicycle. So that's where the MEPs discuss the various proposals and legislation. And what we say is that the Council and the Parliament adopt a legislation by co-decision. That means that one is not more important than the other, but they meet together and find compromises, building in the member states' concerns and the MEPs' citizens' concerns. So these are the 3 decision-making institutions, as we say. Next slide, please. Just to focus on the European Commission, we have 27 European commissioners. You can see the Commissioner of Irish nationality in red, Mairead McGuinness, Commissioner for Financial Services, Financial Stability and Capital Markets Union. She is flanked by commissioners with other portfolio areas, and then you can see there are commissioners who are vice presidents. So that normally means they've been in the Commission for an additional mandate, and they have a little bit more oversight. So they'll work on broader issues like values and transparency, promoting the European way of life, a Europe fit for the digital age. And then the commissioners who are on their first mandate will be working directly with the DGs or the departments to produce concrete proposals. And they, at the very top of the Commission, President von der Leyen is overseeing her policy objectives for the 5 years of her mandate. So that commission is in power since 2019, and there are 2 years left to run. Next slide, please. So this is the Berlaymont that I described earlier, the European Commission headquarters. If you look at this picture on the top right, you will see that's very familiar, because normally whenever there's a report from Brussels, you'll find Tony standing there saying, the European Commission believes this, the European Commission wants that, this is the problem of the day, this is the challenge, this is the proposed solution, proposed compromise. Same for the picture underneath that, which is the Berlaymont entrance. So normally the journalists will stand there and use that as a visual prop to their stories from Brussels. On the bottom right, you can see the Berlaymont press room. So this is the room Méabh was talking about when she said about a bit like the White House. A bit like the White House, the European Commission is one of the only political institutions that runs a briefing every single day. So every single day at midday Central European time, 11 o'clock Irish time, anyone in the world can tune in and watch this, and any accredited journalist can pose any question on any topic. So there's a spokesperson, a senior spokesperson on duty, and if you want to ask a question about energy policy, a specialist spokesperson on energy policy will give you an answer. And like Méabh said, it's also a very helpful informal setting. So all of these, journalists from different member states are attending, and like she said, you could have someone from Poland. If there's a big issue in Poland, you can talk to them afterwards and ask them to kind of fill you in and explain what the situation is. And I think this picture may have been taken the day of Brexit, which was the fullest I've ever seen that briefing room. So I was in Brussels whenever the Brexit vote was taken and went down for the briefing. A lot of my colleagues went down for the briefing to hear what we were going to tell the world's media. It was a very emotional day for everyone concerned. Next slide, please. So to talk about the Council of the European Union, every 6 months, a different member state holds the presidency and shapes the agenda for the priorities. There are different what we call council formations. So you can imagine to discuss environmental policy, you need specialists from the departments of environment, ministries for environment across Europe. So these meetings are prepared by the diplomats. So at the basic level, when a policy proposal comes out of the Commission on environmental policy, you'll get diplomats specialized in environmental policy sitting in on the first meetings, identifying, the strengths, what's good about the proposal, what else they'd like to see about the proposal, what would need to change in the proposal for their country to support it. And what you see is a very long, gradual, patient process of shaping the proposal to reach all the compromises for every different member state. So this is prepared by the diplomats. Once it's 90% ready, 90% agreement on all the things that should be in it, it will go to the council formation, which is attended by the ministers. The ministers will find the last little bit of compromise, and then the final approved version that's been approved by the diplomats and the ministers will go to the heads of state and government to sort of rubber seal, and they issue a thing called council conclusions. So council conclusions are the documents in which the member states and the diplomats agree, take a position, if you like. So they can be quite, useful things to quote in some of your pieces, particularly for, I would say, foreign affairs. They can be a bit dry. They're the product of a compromise, but every word has been negotiated in them. So the difference between, we are concerned, we are deeply concerned, we are concerned, we are, everything has been given a certain nuance. So if you're interested in any particular policy, like let's say migration, you'd do well to look at the Justice and Home Affairs files that are going through those councils. You could also maybe reach out to someone in a government department, say the Department of Justice here in Ireland, and ask them what they think about the proposal from the Commission and how it's being dealt with. There's also an agency involved, Frontex, so you could reach out to someone in Frontex to see if they'd give you another angle. So that is enough, I think, about the Council of the European Union. Next slide, please. A word about the European Parliament. So the European Parliament has MEPs which are directly elected by the citizens. The last election was May 2019. The next election will be around May 2024. You can see on the right a picture of Ireland's MEPs. I won't go through all the names, but next slide, please. One thing I would like to point out about the European Parliament is that the names of the parties and the party groups are the same all across the European Union. So, for example, Fine Gael here in Ireland will have signed up with the EPP, the European People's Party. So on the top, you can see it there. So all the Fine Gael MEPs have a political family when they go to the European Parliament. So they will find their counterparts in other European member states. Let's see, another one, Fianna Fáil are in what's now known as GUI, NGL. So one thing that's quite helpful really is to find the equivalence. So if you're interested in Labour policy, or if you're a Labour Party supporter, you can look for the SND, the Socialists and Democrats, and that gives you access. That tells you immediately which member states are which political party to look into in other member states. So if you're looking at the Labour movement all across the EU and you want to look at the Labour movement in France or the Labour movement in Germany, a nice way of looking into that is to look up the S&D and see which are the German and the French parties. So it's a sort of a shorthand in a way for people to understand how to orientate themselves in different European countries. So if I went to a European country and I wanted to find, let's say, the Greens, it's easy to find the Greens, or it's easy to find the Socialists, or it's easy to find the centre right or the centre left. So it's a nice orientation, and it's something that you can find something to. So next slide, please. So my own tips for EU stories, I would say it's very useful to figure out where the proposal is within the decision-making process. So are you talking about something that the European Commission is just proposing? Have the member states agreed? Has it been discussed in Council? Has it been discussed in the Parliament? Yes or no? Or is this just something that the Commission has proposed and nobody has made any movements on? Is it something that's actually been agreed between the Parliament and the Council and it's going to come into effect very soon? Where is the proposal? Whereabouts is it? Explore different positions taken by different actors. So what I mean by that is, I mentioned it earlier, so you're looking at who wants what and who's going to get what. Who are the winners? If a certain thing happens, who's going to win? Who stands to lose? What would happen next? You can look up statistics, opinion polls, interviews to illustrate that. You need to try and get an interesting angle, I would say. Like one example I like at this time of year is the time change. So every year, twice a year, we change the time. This is a very long and interesting history. I'd encourage you to look it up. So dating back to the Second World War, whenever coal was needed to produce war industrial goods, they decided to rein in the energy consumption in domestic settings. So certain countries were at war with each other and they wanted all to be harmonized. Long, interesting background. It was abandoned after World War II, and then during the 1970s, it was reintroduced. But at this point, we had the EECE, the European Coal and Steel Community. So actually, it wasn't practical for parts of the Union and the emerging single market to be on different time zones to the other parts. So the member states asked the Commission to harmonise it. So the Commission did harmonise it in the 70s and said, we will facilitate this, but the member states need to tell us what time zone they want to be on. So this was done. And there was a very big campaign in 2018, 2019 by citizens, MEPs, to abolish this biannual time change, saying we don't need this anymore. Technology has advanced. We can save energy in other ways. It's very disruptive to industrial processes, to people's health. There've been all sorts of studies that it increases stress levels. Children don't adjust for weeks on end, etc., etc. So the Commission held an online consultation, and people overwhelmingly supported abolishing time change. The Commission proposed to end it, but the member states had to decide what time zone they wanted to be on and when they would introduce it. So this happened in April 2019. And when I say find an angle, Paddy Smith, who was the European correspondent for the Irish Times, immediately seized on this and said, but Brexit. So if the UK is no longer bound by the obligation to harmonise with the rest of the European Union, you could have a situation where Ireland decides to adopt a certain position on time change in harmony with the rest of the European Union, and the UK decides to stay out, which would mean that Northern Ireland would be on a separate time zone to the rest of Ireland. So he ran with a headline, "Clocks in Dublin and Belfast could be on different times after Brexit," which was a really eye-catching way to present this. So rather than going down the very kind of bureaucratic, the Commission is proposing, there's been an online consultation, citizen consultation, he just went with the most dramatic angle of Belfast and Dublin could be on a different time zone. So you read it and say, what? So you read the article and then he gets you in. So then you read the article and realize, so this is how this might end up happening. Interesting. Where are we at? How is it going to happen? So it's sort of a nice practical example, again, like Niamh was saying earlier, or Maeve was saying earlier, of how to find a real life implication for such a sort of story. And spoiler alert, the member states still haven't decided on who's going to go on what time zone, or because Ireland is on the same time zone as Portugal and the UK, but Spain is harmonized with France and Germany, even though we're on a similar meridian. So, really it is, the Commission has said it's for member states to decide. It remains for member states to decide, but, they have other priorities now if we look at things like the energy crisis and the war in Ukraine. So next slide, please. For more inspiration, I'd encourage you to look at the press service of the different institutions. For example, the Commission has the spokesperson service, the Council press service, the European Parliament has a press service as well, so you can find differences in the positions between the three institutions. There's a number of EU news sources you can subscribe to, so the Commission representation in Ireland, the EMI also do a great newsletter. We've got a radio service called EU News Ireland with that link, Podbean. Politico.eu is a really, really good source of very insightful articles. So they write very, I'm not going to say gossipy, but they write very kind of interesting insider articles that focus on the personalities and motivations behind some of the policies. So it's a nice way to get an insight into the dynamics of certain issues. EU Observer is also a good source. And then you follow EU News in mainstream newspapers. So Naomi O'Leary is the Irish Times correspondent at the moment. And I'm sure everyone knows Tony Connolly, the RTE correspondent. So I'd encourage you to look into that. So with that, are there any questions or any clarifications people would like to raise?
I'll jump in with a question just quickly, Grace. And that was really great, a really great overview of all the different kind of spaces there are out there. I'd love to get kind of your thoughts on, so you've gone into a really good kind of level or briefing on all the different institutional parts and kind of their work. What do you think is a good way to link in the work that happens in the three institutions on a day-to-day basis into something that has real world tangible impact to kind of people on the ground here? So in the same way that Manny was talking about kind of her Erasmus stuff, or that Maeve was talking about kind of the impact of energy prices on bakeries on a day-to-day level, what do you see as a good way to go down that process?
Well, I suppose it depends on the topic. So looking back over the last year or two, a big issue at the beginning of the pandemic was the procurement of vaccines. So we'd engaged in joint procurement. Ireland had engaged in joint procurement along with the rest of the EU. So the EU had taken the position, and the Commission was the chief negotiator, chief bargainer for vaccines, was to say that, we're a union of 27 member states. If we go to buy vaccine on the world stage, we are more likely to be seen as a priority by the big pharmaceutical companies, since we're representing 450 million people, than let's say a country like Ireland that's representing, a much smaller number, one of 27. So we'll bargain with clout, etc. Remember the first few weeks of the pandemic, the UK had UK manufactured vaccine. They had AstraZeneca, which was first off the post with their results and with their availability to market. So since AstraZeneca was on the UK territory, they'd agreed with the government that they'd provide the UK with. So there was an awkward situation for a few weeks where the UK was having access to vaccine before the rest of the EU, and AstraZeneca had contracts to provide vaccine to the EU. So the way it worked was the Commission negotiated options in the different vaccines so that whenever they came to market, the Commission would have the option to buy. But AstraZeneca came under fire for not honouring those options and prioritising the UK. So there you see people, are they going to get their vaccine? Is their life going to go back to normal? What are the stakes? How you have to ask questions. So, what are the stakes? What could the outcome be? What are the different positions? you know, and a lot of this was tied up in the narrative of, is the UK better off without being in the EU? Are we better off being in the EU? You know, what's your filter? You know, what question are you really asking behind the story that you're reporting? So then a number of people were pushing back and saying, you know, then the story actually ended up that we were getting access to a wider range of vaccines because of the successful procurement by the EU. But for us, say on the more defensive press angle during those few months, it was harder to hold our heads and say, no, we will have vaccine. We just have to wait for the vaccines we've supported to come through. And they ended up actually being, you know, the highest quality vaccines, because everyone realized that Pfizer and Moderna were a different technology, and so they became the desired vaccines, which we had more access to than they had in the UK. So I suppose when you talk about real life, like, it's about finding that real life implication. So, you know, getting access to vaccine meant life could go back to normal, meant you could go traveling again, meant you could go have your wedding, meant you could, you know, go to university in person, meant. So what does it mean for people? And what does the lack of access to this mean, or the delayed access to this mean? And who do you blame for it? And who, you know, so that's one example I would take. I might just stop talking and see if there are other examples.
No, I think that's really good. I wonder, is there anyone from the floor who wants to ask a question of Grace? As I say, she is an absolute expert in both the institutions and also how that translates down to kind of the day-to-day in Ireland, and kind of what the decisions made there mean for our life here, and also how we can kind of impact those decisions made there. So is there any questions, or Grace, is there anything that you want to touch on maybe that you haven't?
No, I think I've said plenty. I mean, if anyone wants to clarify anything, go ahead, but I think I've talked enough.
Okay. Okay, well, what I might do in that case, if there's no questions coming through, I might kind of invite our final speaker just to chat quickly and say a couple of words. Our final speaker is Noel O'Connell, who is the CEO of European Movement Ireland, so our organisation here. So here we go, Noel.
Thanks, Rory, and hi, everyone. And apologies, I think I saw James Kemmy. James, did you have your hand up for a question? So I don't want to be that person that jumps in. No, but no, I have three screens, Rory, so it's easier. Not at all. I'll hand over to James first, and then I'll jump.
Sorry, sorry to be interrupting, but no, I was just going to ask Grace, just so for someone who is like interested in pursuing a career in EU journalism, would you recommend kind of focusing in on certain key areas, like certain topics, whether that's foreign policy or economic competition, the single market, or is it too early now for like someone like me, still like an undergrad student, to be looking at a niche area? Would you be recommending just to be like open to anything really?
For me, it's one of those things that you can have it all, you can do it all, but just not all at the same time. So even just as a commission official, naturally you work on a policy at a time. You can be interested in multiple policies for sure, but I would go, you know, this is an area where you can go extremely detailed, and sort of to really understand the ins and outs of, let's say, environmental policy, COP27 at the moment, you really need a lot of knowledge. So I would say follow your passions, whatever policy you're most interested in at the minute. Read up on that, learn up on that, because every policy is managed in a slightly different way, depending on the treaties, depending on the council formations, you know, whether they're for co-decision, whether they require unanimity. So foreign policy requires unanimity, so every member state has to agree. So if one member state says, no, I don't agree with sanctions on this entity in Russia, they won't happen. Whereas, you know, other areas are on QMV, qualified majority vote. So, you know, I would say, let's say you're interested in environmental policy, go with that. Read up as much as you can and as widely within that policy area as you can. Then I would say, you know, go that multifaceted route of, you know, following what the Commission's proposing on environmental policy. You could look up which is the European Commissioner making proposals in this area, follow them on Twitter. If they're due to, you know, you can follow the Commission spokesperson service, and, you know, you can sign up to that particular area. I'd follow which MEPs are active on this, which MEP is the rapporteur for the relevant committee, and follow them on Twitter. That way you'll get the Parliament angle. Then look at, keep an eye out for the schedule. You can look up the schedule in the European Council and the Council of the EU website for the Environmental Council formation, and follow that as well. And then also follow the Irish government department responsible. So I would say you have to specialize really to kind of make any sense of it, but that doesn't mean you're going to be specialized in that area forever. It's a bit like when you're at university doing a particular subject in a particular semester or for a specific year. Like me and my colleagues would work on a certain policy for 2 to 5 years and then move to a different policy for 2 to 5 years. I worked on enlargement, then I moved to external affairs. Now I'm in communication. For my next move, you know, let's see, as we say in French, à suivre. But you can't do everything at once. So I would say you really do need to focus.
That's great. Thanks, James, for a really good question. I have 2 questions here from Eve in the chat there. And Stephen, I might ask you to chime in on these as an ex-journalist. So Eve asks, what would your answer, what be your answer to people saying that journalism is a dying industry and you shouldn't choose a career in it? And the second question is, they'd absolutely love to enter the journalism world. However, at times it seems a little bit intimidating and competitive for someone who's not politically savvy. What would your tips be for differentiating yourself in the industry?
Thanks, Rory. They're great questions. On the first one about a dying industry, when I decided I wanted to study journalism way back in 2004, people said exactly the same thing at that point in time. But yet the industry, now it has undergone an awful lot of change since that time, but it has survived. And, you know, journalists can still make a living out of being journalists, and we you know, see that they're more required than ever before. So I wouldn't let that put you off in terms of it being a dying industry, because it's certainly unstable as an industry, but it has always been unstable as an industry. But yet, you know, it has survived, it has adapted, it's shown resilience, and people are still able to make a living out of it. It's certainly true, it's very competitive. And the way to, you know, the way I would advise in terms of setting yourself apart or getting ahead in that competitiveness is actually simple and difficult at the same time. There's no magic formula, but I think what stands to people is that the more experience they can get as early as possible sets them up very well in terms of their early career and their career progression. And experience doesn't have to be bells and whistles or spotlight. Experience is your local paper, your college paper, whatever it is, anything that gets your name into print or into on the internet or wherever it is, and that demonstrates, you know, that you can work well and with quality, and you can bring quality to that work. That's kind of the best tip I could give about that. And the final thing I'd say is a lot of people start as journalists, one here, and don't continue as journalists, and that's quite common. So it's funny, I was talking to some of my college friends about this just last week. So, you know, 5 of us are still very friendly. One of us, I think, are still working purely as a journalist, but the rest of us are in associated industries. So in communications, in public policy, in whatever it is. So it's a very good training. And, you know, if you do, you know, begin your career as a journalist, that is an even better training to open up possibilities in a whole other range of associated industries. So, you know, if you decide to be a journalist now, there's nothing to say that you will be a journalist in 30 years' time, but you will have an interesting career path to wherever you end up in 30 years' time.
That's great. That's a really good answer, Stephen. Thanks for that. I suppose I hope I haven't missed any other questions. I don't know if I have. because I'm conscious of everyone's kind of time being precious. So we might kick off to Noelle now. And I'll tell you how you can send me other questions afterwards, just after she's spoken. So
Great,
Noelle,
thanks.
hello.
Thank you, Rory. Thanks, everyone. And I won't keep you all. I won't keep you all long, but just to say, thanks a million. And it's great to see so many of you here this morning, this afternoon, today. From our side, as Rory said, my name is Noelle O'Connell. I'm the CEO of European Movement Ireland, and we're delighted to be working with Barbara Grace and the colleagues in the European Commission on this hugely important initiative. That's one of my day jobs hat. I'm also a Vice President of European Movement International, and then I have the honour as well of being the Irish National Citizen Representative to the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is the world's largest experiment, I guess you could say, and exercise in participatory democracy, discussing so many of the topics that you have spoken about already. And fantastic to hear from Méabh and from Manny, and you know, from my side as an organization that deals in the whole area of communicating and encouraging people to think about our relationship with the European Union and what type of an EU we want Ireland to be in and how we can all contribute to that. Journalism communications is hugely valuable. It gives you that ability to analyze and synthesize information and kind of clarity and writing and being succinct. Those of us who are not trained as journalists can sometimes struggle with that key attribute and skill set. So that's why it is very useful across a wide range of careers and opportunities to actually have that background. And you know, as you'll have heard from Grace's presentation and Rory and colleagues, being able to look at the lens of how the European Union impacts and affects all of our lives and communicate that across multiple platforms is a hugely important task, a responsibility. And I think you starting out in your career play a really crucial role in helping us hold our leaders and our political the politicians and the wider EU ecosystem to account. So don't underestimate the role that you can play. And I really look forward to your supporting and following your journey on this SMEDIAs process with much attention. And I'm looking forward to seeing the next Méabh or the next Tony Connolly from this group. But I wish you all the best of luck and continued success in everything that you're doing. Thanks. Over to you, Rory.
Thanks a million, Noelle. Everyone, just what I think might be handy is just to finish up, just to talk about the competition itself and some of the guidelines. So you will have all hopefully received a participant pack in your email, and if you haven't, you can shoot an email to info@europeanmovement.ie and the team will get one out to you. Part of that pack is there's guidelines about the competition itself, which gives you some of the topics that we suggest you talk about, talks about the rules, and it covers the dates, I think, but just if it's not there, just to flag that the entry dates are between the 1st and the 16th of March 2030 or 2023 rather. So you've got a bit of time to kind of start thinking creatively about what you want to write about, what you think is the best way to tell the story that you've identified. And then the events itself takes place on the 20th of April next year. If you go to that pack, there's so many resources there. So talking about the information you can get from the Commission representation, talk about some of the information that you can get from ourselves, the different information you can get from the Commission offices and the institutions in Brussels, and general stuff. There's a wealth of knowledge there that you can use to really start tracking down the stuff that you need to put together a really engaging, insightful, interesting piece of journalism about the EU. I suppose, though, we might call a halt to the event now, though. Can I thank you all for taking part, for coming along and kind of spending your time with us this afternoon. It's been really great to see kind of the engagement from everyone here. And most importantly, I just want to echo what all of our speakers have said today. Best of luck. We're really excited to read your entries, and I know they're going to be fantastic contributions. So with that, we'll say good afternoon.